Hi, hello everybody, and welcome to this class that I'm going to be doing a lecture from home to talk about some of the conversations that we have been talking about in this African Diaspora class this winter semester. And one of the things we wanted to talk about was to explicate on the conversations that we have been having from other regions. So far we have covered how the political economy of race has kind of played out in North America, as well as in other spaces like the Caribbean, both Spanish Caribbean and Latin America, both Spanish, Latin America, and Brazil as well. We also touched a bit on conversations about race and power and economics in Indian region, that's Pacific, Latin America. So we pretty much covered the whole, both of the continents and other spaces in the Caribbean, but we have not covered um, English-speaking Caribbean. And so the readings that was assigned today focus a lot more on conversations about power, race, and dynamics of exclusion and inclusion in the Anglo-phone Caribbean spaces, which is going to be the site of our conversation today. But it will also be kind of like a wraparound of everything we have been talking about the past month, which will investigate how exclusive tendencies and narratives about race and ideas percolate into people's consciousness, changing how they see society and how power, both political and economic, is then employed or deployed to the disadvantage of other groups within these spaces. And I do want to talk about the readings that we were engaging today. And the first one is Ibram Kendi's Stamp from the Beginning, which was a groundbreaking book on racial discourse published in 2016, and which has then shaped conversations about consciousness about inclusion and exclusion of peoples in the US space, but also internationally. We do also have another book by Henrice Altink, an Altink's book, Public Secret, Race and Color in Colonized and Independent Jamaica, published in 2019, also engaged using historical narratives, perception about race in predominantly minority spaces, predominantly Black spaces. So Altink's book is situated in Jamaica, and it's going to be the premise of the work that this lecture that I'm about to give. And the last one that we will be talking about is on hold on, let me look here. I have my notes, Ibram Kendi and Henrik, and yes, I do have another book on by Kwan, not a book, an essay by Kwan that talks about perception of race in Trinidad and Tobago. So the last conversation here will be focusing on Trinidad and Tobago as a site for imperial discourse and anti-police brutality. So all of these books that or these essays or conversations are going around talking about how power narratives shape discourse. And the main theme I want you to take away is the overriding thread of anti-blackness. Okay, so let me start with in Ibram Kendi's book, which is really one of my favorite books that I've read so far on this topic. And Kendi is a historian, and he uses historical narratives to dispel notions of racism, and in answering the questions that where do racism come from, where does racist ideas emerge from. And one of the things that Kendi does in this book is to ignite a conversation on why notions of racism are constantly reinventing themselves. So the first thing to talk about this book is to dispel the notion that racism does not emerge, to dispel the notion that racism emerged from some kind of prejudice and hatred that is primordial, that people are born or are taught to hate each other. So therefore, racism does not emerge from prejudice or hatred. Like those who are racist are not necessarily prejudicial or hateful towards the people that they other, but instead it emerges from self-serving policies whose proponents justify their actions by inventing racist ideas. So in this conversation, we want to look at race from the perspective of Kendi, who argues that the racist ideas are self-serving. They are invented and produced by power holders for purposes that could be intended to be helpful towards a specific agenda they are pursuing at the time. So he uses the history of the United States to analyze how producers of racist ideas have used them to self-perpetuate power dynamics that benefits them. Right? So in the US, mostly this has been promoted by powerful people within the society. So it'll be specific groups that have clout and power to shape narratives about society with a specific agenda, okay? And the agenda is often either political power or economic power or both. So in the example, segregationists, those who are totally unions of those who are against multiracial societies, such as enslavers or segregatories like during the Jim Crow, convinced themselves that slavery benefited them, and they convinced the rest of society that perhaps the slaves required that condition, that it was healthy for them. They wouldn't know. They'd get crazy if they weren't in slavery. But it's not just the segregationists that were that were for racism. Even some abolitionists that we have studied so far harbored racist thoughts. They thought that, well, slavery was abhorring and unnatural and disgusting and anti-Christian, but Black people are not equal and did not have the same resources or ingredients or makeup that will be fitting for an industrialized society. We're going to see how these kind of thoughts go on as we continue this discussion. So therefore, one of the things that Kendi is telling us is that racist ideas emerge from economic and political self-interest. They are created for the purpose of serving economic and political self-interest. And this is some trope that you can follow all the way from the enslavement of Black Africans in the 16th century to treatment, police othering of people of color in US spaces to now, to this moment. So it's invented They are invented. They are not natural occurrences. All right, there's no supposed lack of equality among different groups of people. There is inherent equality, but they have to be created. So it's an invention. It's a social construct. I want you to take that away. Okay. Now, Kendi also tells about this idea of a dueling narrative. There's a dueling narrative, a dual, which means two narratives, and dueling, which means they're wrestling. So there's one dueling narrative of progressive forces that are anti-racist, and then there are forces that are for racism. So there is a dueling narrative of racial and racist progress. So racial progress will mean there is an attainment of multiracial or color blindness or some sort of understanding of living together without conflict. But that the narrative of racial progress goes in concurrently with racist progress. So racial progress versus racist progress. I hope we're together here. So the racist progress is the reenactment of racist ideas by power holders in every opportune time when they find it. All right. So it's kind of like a somersaulting of progress, the somersaulting of like a flip of progress in which you make movements forward and then you make movements backward. So I'll give you an example here that Kendi is talking about, one which involves, like in 2008, the United States elects a black president, Barack Obama, the first one. And then in 2016, about 8 years later, they elect Donald Trump, a right-wing candidate who has xenophobic and racist language toward the president, toward people of color, both black and brown. So in almost 10 years, you have progress, which the attainment of this elusive office for people of color and women by an individual who is othered. And then the resulting effect is the election of an extreme candidate to the counter of that supposed progress. So yes, the somersaulting of progress in terms of racial identity, and then or racial attaining racial progress, and then and a subsequent reaction of anti-progress. We can think about this also within the lens of a Lincoln, going back to the 1860s, Lincoln Proclamation against slavery, and the establishment of Reconstruction in the in the U.S. South, in the antebellum South, but that ends up with a return of KK Klan, Ku Klux Klan, and Southern power barons reenacting Jim Crow. So on one hand, you freed people, and about a decade after, KKK and extremist militias come back and suffocate the freedoms and disempower the enslaved people who had tasted freedom. In a moment in that time, the US Congress had substantial representation of people of color, right, from the South. And then after the Ku Klux and Jim Crow laws were enacted across the South, many of these Congress people were removed from office, and dubious things happened that the Congress became almost all white again. So in every moment in the US history, according to Kendi, there is always moments of racial progress and then subsequent reaffirmation of racist ideas almost in the moment. Okay, but when he's also critical about supposed panacea of helping racism, some of these panacea are the argument that Black people are likely to be accepted and respected in mainstream society if they have self-sacrifice, education, economic advancement, what he called upliftsuation, that the more Black people are uplifted into the community by performing skills that are relevant to society, the more they are likely to be seen as people and granted equality. Same argument like Booker T's talented 10th that we have talked about in class already. But upliftment is a dynamic which forces the inclusion of Black humanity on the people who have been segregating them. So it doesn't work. It means like Black people have to be a certain way in order to be accepted as people. Why can't they just be accepted as people from the first place or on the first place? All right. So then Kendi has three groupings of people. The first one, he calls them segregationists. The segregationists are sort of like the enslavers, the people who are Jim Crow, the likes of apartheid promoting governments. They consider that Black people have a pathology, that they are stamped from the beginning, that they are kind of like the outside in this human race, the weakest of all of them races. So therefore, there's no way you're going to include them. Black people have a pathological condition that limits them from attaining full human capability. That's the one group. And obviously, there's some people who are this start to this day, but majority of them have kind of died off. It's often rare to find people who are openly segregationist in this fashion. The second group are called assimilationists. And assimilationists are people who think that projects like upliftment, education, economic advancement, self-sacrifice, or positive visibility of Black people will help them get integrated in society. And that Blackness is a function of the environment that causes pathology. And one of these pathologies is slavery, that slavery disoriented Black people's idea of what it is to be human and drove them insane. And those consequences of insanity are reflected in ways in which the Black bodies or Black lives live in the U.S. And in order to correct this, they have to be assimilated into or reoriented to fit to be normal again. And it's sort of like a sin to be Black, and therefore you have to be reoriented either by education or other for change or lightening of Blackness, or by marrying up, which means marrying white, living in white neighborhood, doing things that are constantly associated with whiteness, or being good Christian or something. So assimilation has been the dominant narrative about how to include Black people. So the high point of assimilationist policies is the way in which the civil rights movement was anchored. It was anchored on integration. An integration to white society, not integration of white society into Black society, right? And we all know that the benefit that emerged out of civil rights enactment in 1964, but we know also the limits of that. And I think new scholarship is emerging, questioning the extent to which civil rights gains have been helpful or have sort of deteriorated economic power within other communities in the US space. So what is a racist idea according to Kendi? A racist idea is any concept or idea that regards one racial group as inferior or superior to another group. Racist idea is not limited to color, or racist idea is not limited to phenotypical features. You can racialize other groups. You can racialize the poor, for example. Why are they poor? They're lazy. That's racializing an entire category of people whose only lack is material access. You can racialize gay people, for example. Oh, you know, they stink. You know, they're not fit to be human beings. You can racialize disabled people. So racial group is this thinking of superiority that is inherent in a specific category of people. So we are moving away from defining race as just phenotypical black, brown, or yellow. We are moving into how to racialize people, how to make others special over others. Are we together? I hope so. And now the opposite of racist idea is an anti-racist idea. An anti-racist idea is one that is inclusive at core. It says that the position of other groups, whether material or physical, has nothing to do with their humanity. And we have to accept their humanity as it is. And therefore, when we make policy, we have to be cognizant of these differences and allow those differences to be factored into decisions that we make or policies that are created. Okay. So one of the quotes that I like from Kendi here is this: we must accept that Black history of oppression has made Black opportunities, not Black people, inferior. Here we are talking about the idea that it is the limited opportunities of people of color in the US that has led them to this condition. The limited opportunity, not the people themselves. And if you increase opportunities, then you will see a different outcome. We must accept that American history of oppression has made Black opportunities, not Black people, inferior. Okay, I want to end this with that on Kendi's review, and I'm going to move on to this other guy, the lady Henrice Altink. Public secret public secrets, race and color in colonial and independent Jamaica. Now, the book here is examining, I'm going to use it to think about Kendi. You know, it's examining race in predominantly Black space, which is Jamaica, which has a higher profile relative to other Caribbean countries. And the book has the same vibes of Jemima Pierre's Predicament of Blackness that came out 2013. And perhaps one of the central themes of this book is this idea of racialized inequality in Jamaica. Race is a public secret in Jamaica. It is not talked about, it's not discussed, but everybody knows it exists. So in Jamaica, like many other Latin Americans we have talked about, has color blindness as a dominant narrative of what Jamaica is. And there is an inherent desire for whiteness or brownness for privilege, right? So within this continuum of whiteness in Jamaica, privilege is measured on your color based on where you fall on the spectrum. Therefore, the more darker you are in Jamaica, the less privilege you have. And the more lighter you are, including white, the more privilege you have in Jamaica. All right. Now, the backdrop here is in Jamaica, race constitutes an absent presence. It's an oxymoron here. Absent presence. It is absent because slavery and colonialism are over, and Jamaica is predominantly Black. But it underpins all social relation Race underpins all social relations in Jamaica. Race is all around in every aspect, but could never be spotted or located or articulated. Jamaica therefore becomes a place of contradiction and ambiguities. It's a place in which the physical presence of white supremacy is missing. There is no bodies, there's no people rioting the Congress or the Brazilian Senate. But you are surrounded with a white complex, superiority complex, embedded in power structures of the country. So in Jamaica, what is called African Jamaica, they help to uphold and sustain and place a premium on white and light skin. Perception of whiteness becomes symbols of status, and society is still grappling with the consequences of history of slavery and colonialism that were in themselves colorized. Yes, yet that's not the complete story about Jamaica that Altink wants us to know. She also talks about moments of eruptions, moments in which there have been forceful attempts to reconfigure Jamaican society. All right. In Jamaica today, less than 2% of the population is classified as European or white. Maybe slightly more than 10% are mixed race of different categories, including Indian, Chinese, Black, European, or Spaniard background. So in a way, it has a big population of about mixed race people who have a variant of color from very dark skin to very light skin, and 2% white people of European origin. But in many studies of Jamaica, according to Altink, the studies have often ignored the native logic of racism, how the natives think about race and how they have either internalized it or repelled it. So the argument she makes is that she uproots race as the hidden hand in every aspect of Jamaican social and economic development. Jamaica, racial barriers to employment exist, so people who are darker skinned in Jamaica are less likely to get jobs. Education has been a site of upward mobility for many Jamaicans, but this education is dominated and access to the best of school is available to more lighter skin or white Jamaicans, contrary to lower class and darker skinned Jamaicans. There is also the argument of socialization that she made, as that Jamaicans are socialized to realize the benefits of being light skinned and the disadvantages of being dark skinned, and people make choices based on those things. They make choices about who they marry, and when they don't have access to that, they revert to some self-harming practices such as skin lightening or nose sharpening or pursuit of Eurocentric view or beauty standard. But in general, she highlights the consequences of discrimination of darker-skinned Jamaican as a pervasive problem in the society, which is structured around white supremacy, even though slavery had ended since 1833 or 1838, to be precise, and independence in 1960, 1962, 1960s, right? I think. So there's some narrative about slavery that she gets into, and I'm not going to get into all that creates this condition. And the narrative is, after slavery is banned, who gets to have the power? And mostly within the slave structure, in a place where there's one white guy for 12 slaves, there's limited number of women or partners, sexual partners. Therefore, as we have seen in other spaces, like Dominican Republic or Brazil, there's a lot of mixing, but not as much as it is in those spaces, in Spanish or Portuguese spaces, here you create a population of a group of society called the mulattoes, the lighter skinned children of enslaved who are still slaves, but they're quick to get freedom and are given training and allowed to run the society after slavery is banned, and they gain political power to the disadvantage of darker skin, or supposedly in the US lingo, field Negroes. So, but I wanted to think about Altink's work through the lenses of Ibram Kendi. And I want to talk about anti-blackness, because in the absence of race as a category, what is happening in Jamaica will be classified as anti-blackness. Okay, so how is Jamaica has an anti-black trope and an anti-racist trope, and I wanted to flesh that out a little bit more. When you think about Jamaica, you think about Jamaica as a space in which the three notions of Kendi are applicable. The first one is the segregationists, the anti-black people who are openly racist, and this is the trope that follows the slavery, the Christmas revolt that happens in the 1820s, and the pushback to it, which included decapitating people and cutting their heads if they rebelled. So it was totally, the question was, stay in your place, okay? And it is strong, and it is anti-black, and it is violent. All right. Then there is this assimilationist logic narrative, which seems to be dominant in Jamaica, according to Altink. And the assimilationist logic is the narratives of power through the British angle, is that access to power depends on how British you are. And therefore, Jamaica becomes situated within this Atlantic realm of British Empire, and access to the empire, to educational pursuits in England, or to be of English heritage becomes markers of how assimilated you are into white society. So then it doesn't confuse me. It's just a logical sequence that the assimilationists become the power holders in Jamaica. And the whole country's narrative is situated on this desire to be assimilated into the British consciousness. All right, so see, assimilation is sort of like Anglicization of Jamaican island. And you think about it through the political leaders, the political parties, the stance they make, the position of Jamaica vis-a-vis England in terms of Jamaica is not a republic. It is self-governing, but the head of state of Jamaica is still King Charles, 2021. All right, so that's the assimilationist project. And I know there's more I could talk about. I'm just running very fast here. But then there is this fascination with Jamaica that is, as it's an anti-black space, and there's a lot of history regarding that. When you think about Black excellence, especially when you talk about sports, then Jamaica comes to your face all the time. Like, it's a small island, about 4 million people, maybe less than that. But when we watch the Olympics, we always looking forward to the Jamaicans. Jamaica outperforms its size gravely. Is in our imagination about Blackness. I think when you talk about Blackness, for the longest time, you would think, oh, United States as the mainstream variant of how to be Black, exported globally, and then it will be Jamaica. So Black excellence in sports gave Jamaica a lot of soft power. Still to this day, the fastest guy who ran the 100-meter sprint, Usain Bolt, Jamaican guy. Fastest woman, Jamaican guy. You can go to the Wikipedia and see all the sports and athletes in cricket, and mostly short distance tracks, and you see Jamaica. It's hard to talk about Black excellence without talking Jamaica. And that is an anti-racist logic because that has never been there. It's very new, right? Then there is this trend of Jamaica that is very popular among radical leftists through reggae music and Rastafarism. Now, I don't have time to go through it, but Rastafarism is perhaps one of the most anti-racist things that ever emerged out of black spaces. And Rastafarism, as complicated and as it is, and I don't want to dilute it too much because I don't know too much to speak on it. But what I do know is that it is syncretic religion that uses some forms of Christian logic, but they put black bodies in the spaces that were hitherto occupied by white folks. So, for example, Haile Selassie is almost worshipped as a god, and the prophets are black people like Marcus Garvey and many other people, and they use reggae music as a way to like the voice of Rastafarism. Rastafarism include growing dreadlocks and living vegetarian and kind of disassociating yourself with imperialism and imperialism and overconsumption. But other than that, you see Rastafarism taking a great role in the return movement from around 1940s. Fulfilling suggestions of Marcus Garvey, who asked the African people in the diaspora to return to Africa. And a lot of Rastafarians returned to Ethiopia at some point. There were about 40,000 of them by 1970s, and then the population has dwindled. It's less than 400 families now. Okay, so when you think about Jamaica, you think Rastafarism, the only religion allowed, remember, people forget, but marijuana is illegal in Jamaica. Rastafarians can't smoke marijuana. Not every Jamaican can, but they can smoke it for spiritual reasons. So when you think about Jamaica, you think Rasta and reggae, and those are really anti-racist things. But even when you within this anti-racist trope of Jamaican Rastafarism and pro-blackness, who gets to be the export, the main star of Rastafarism? It's not Peter Tosh, it's not Barney Whaler, it's not some of these more radical, dark-skinned Jamaican. It is Bob Marley, who is mixed-raced. And Bob Marley is accepted in the US and accepted internationally. Perhaps, I'm not saying Bob is great and I listen to him and his music a classic, but the speed at which Bob was accepted, contrary to other performers, other musicians, will tell you a lot about whose visibility is acknowledged, whose music is acknowledged as talent. Right? All are Jamaican, but you can do your own research on that and see it for yourself. Jamaica is also anti-racist because of Black intellectuals. When some of the leading thinkers in academy have Jamaican ancestry, Marcus Garvey, the return movement, we've read about him, Jamaican American guy who kind of was a pioneer in thinking the return movement will solve problems for Jamaica. It was a leading intellectual. He wrote a lot of books and kind of analyze race and racial issues in much more critical detail than most people have. Jamaican guy. As recently as Colin Powell, first Secretary of State in the US, Jamaican ancestry, also light skin. Marcus Garvey was a dark skinned guy who was a business guy. So Jamaica is the land of educated Black people who are in our imagination more than other Black spaces in the English-speaking world. And they are out playing their role because it's a small country and it is visible in our imagination. So when you think about this anti-racist trope of Jamaica, it gives it a very good foreign appeal for Black people, for diasporic consciousness. But when you examine Jamaica further, you realize that the assimilationists are the power holders in Jamaica, and lighter skinned Jamaicans who tend to live in Montenegro, Montego Bay, not Montenegro, Montego Bay beaches, and have access to British or American passports are the power holders in Jamaica, and darker skinned people are kind of on the periphery of the Jamaican society, even as they are in the minority. You see them in music styles like dancehall music, hardcore dancehall, like performed by people like Vibes Cartel or Mavado, these guys who are like ghetto Gaza, called Gaza, Gaza area of Kingston, populated by predominantly Black and dark-skinned people. So I'm going to end my lecture here by talking briefly about Trinidad and Tobago, where they talk about police brutality. And Trinidad and Tobago is another interesting case. It's one where indentured servants of the British, of British or British Indian origin, mixed up in a space with former enslaved Africans, and they create a republic called Trinidad and Tobago. And in Trinidad and Tobago, racial dynamics, especially police violence, are in play. And here, racialized notions about power are exhibited in the forms of politics dominated by the Indian bourgeoisie class and the mostly Black working class, who tend to also have a little political power. So, and then some of these notions of we must accept that Black America history of oppression has made Black opportunities, not Black people, inferior, playing out in Trinidad, Tobago, where Black people have less opportunities compared to Indian or white or Spaniard Tobagans or Trinidadians. So it's sort of the same thing playing out, especially with regards to police violence that that is indicated in the article you read. So it's the same thing, but the thing to think about is how we can realize racist ideas and how we can use their use. So in the case of Jamaica, racist ideas are hijacked by lighter skinned people who are not segregating, but stating a fact, who have access to whiteness vis-a-vis more dark-skinned people who happen to be majority. So in a majority Black space, we have dynamics of power playing out using racialized notions. Thank you guys, and I am grateful for your time, and I hope you enjoy this lecture. And I'm looking forward to your comments in the post-class announcement. Thank you.